Okay, we're on.
All right, we will call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, May 7th, 2019. I'm off to a good start.
We don't take verbatim minutes.
Pledge of Allegiance. We all stand. We
can still do Stephanie.
No, I don't just pretend to play is up. Okay. All right. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Audience comments. Seeing no audience,
And
we'll check through. Business items. 3A, introduction of the 2019 comp plan amendments. Okay, take it away.
so very quickly, because I think we discussed this briefly at the January meeting, every January 31st is the deadline by which to submit comprehensive plan amendment requests to City Council to be considered by staff and by Council and the Planning Commission before being adopted. And so this year we didn't have any requests from outside parties. These are all things that the city is proposing to do just to keep our own plans updated and current. Every year we update our transportation improvement plan, all of the projects that are within the next 6-year planning horizon. So we've updated that. You see a copy of that attached to your packet just for reference in very, very tiny numbers. The Bethel Sedgwick Corridor Study Plan that was done last year, we added that to the Appendix B of the comp plan by reference. And then it was noticed, really we should have also said specifically the appendices were included in that. So we just added that to make it a complete picture of the study. And then also the PSRC is getting ready to update its main visioning plan, Vision 2040, with Vision 2050. And as they gear up to go through that, they are proposing and adopting some background changes to their plans that we will need to comply with as well. And one of the changes is that the descriptive terms for the various types of local centers have been somewhat revised by the PSRC. What we were calling regional growth centers is now countywide growth centers and other things like that. So we just want to be sure that our plan is kept up to date in terms of the specific terminology we use, because sometimes that actually makes the difference for a grant. Wow.
That we have it correctly adopted in our plan, and it fits perfectly with what the PSRC wants it to be. So we're going to be working on our centers more as we go along. We're looking at changing the size and the composition of some of those centers to better fit with the PSRC's alignment. But we can go into that a little bit later. So I think mostly these are just very basic administrative changes. Did anybody have any question about the TIP? Hi. And Appendix B, I think that was obvious. Let me just go through the information on the centers very briefly. What I provided in the packet, we have both the centers as they're currently adopted, and these are the ones that have been in the comprehensive plan since about 2014. And the way that the PSRC has been revising the criteria for centers, we're now a little bit out of compliance in terms of what they want for our size of city, our level of commercial and residential activity. So one thing we're proposing to do is to reduce the size of some of the centers to kind of shrink them down to only their most commercially active or intense areas, because what we need for a minimum, what they call activity units. It's the number of jobs that's in a certain area, the number of people who live in a certain area, and also the people who come in to shop and use services in that area. So we want to make sure that ours are not too large and too diffuse, because they want to look at how your center is today, not how it could develop within 10 or 20 years. There's minimum requirements just for today, and we don't necessarily meet all of those with all of our centers. So we did a potential resizing of the centers, and we will talk about this again next month as well. This is just an overview. And then we went through the comprehensive plan land use element for the section that deals just with the local centers. And we made a number of changes in here just, again, to bring it up to date, to pull out the sections that talk about things that we've done in the past, things that have already been achieved, some visioning strategies that are kind of outdated. We'll be replacing the map with the newly updated map.
And then just basically going through here and trying to provide some more specific guidance for each of the individual centers. And we will be working on the ones especially at the back for the Kitsap County campus and for the ones on the last couple of pages, which never really had a lot of specific detail. That will be coming up this year as well. But at this point, we're just trying to get something adopted that is as consistent as possible with the PSRC, just as a starting point. Did anybody have any questions about any of the center's changes or the map?
I didn't.
Okay.
I like that we're not calling it South Kitsap Mall anymore, since it hasn't been South Kitsap Mall since.
Yeah, there were a number of things that were so specific, calling out individual businesses or the hospital district and things like that. It's like it's not necessarily where it's going now. So yeah, and just keep it consistent with where we are.
So tell me a little bit about the Upper Mile Hill Center. Because I don't think the city went up past the theaters.
Well,
Yeah, only about a block.
yeah, and
That's what you're considering the Upper Mile Hill?
yeah, I mean we're calling it right here. We're calling it Upper Mile Hill, but it's not all the way out Mile Hill or anything. We just call it that. But yeah, Doug is right. We do just continue the city limits just a little bit past the theater, and then right on the south side here as well, where that boot shape comes down. That's also that little portion's in the city.
So with Annapolis, the Annapolis Center, is Rockwell Park in that center then?
Yes.
So where does that start?
Where does Rockwell?
Rockwell Park is right by the hotel. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So where does the Annapolis Center start?
It's going to start right there.
At Rockwell Park.
Yeah.
So Rockwell all the way to the ferry.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that we got the park and that we got the commuter lot and the little businesses, Whiskey Gulch and the dock.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure that little community hub.
Does it
basically.
include like across the street where like the Blue Goose is?
We didn't go on the uphill side,
Okay.
but that's something that if you think it should be included, that's something we kind of need to get feedback on because this isn't final by any means.
Isn't that area slated for development like that and the across the street, like where Kentucky Fried Chicken is
Bethel
currently?
Center.
I
Yeah.
think eventually it will be.
Yeah, that's
It's already moving up.
Yeah.
that's all that the vacant Bethel Center there has been purchased, and
Yeah.
someone has an eye on some development project there
So-
that might be expanded to include other properties.
Could it be helpful for grants if that was included in the community center? Like, would that be helpful for that?
Well, what we were trying to do with the downtown is we actually were trying to make it separate from Annapolis and not fill in that area between because it was actually too big for what they wanted it to be for a small. It's just a small local center, so it had to be within a certain number of blocks. So, but I think we could certainly try to do something that takes in the businesses across the street. Yeah.
It might, because especially if they're thinking about mixed use on the across the street there at Rockwell, on like where that businesses are being developed, where that KFC is.
Yeah.
That used to be, that was in the Bethel corridor until it got shrunk down a little bit too. So I will talk to Nick about this and see what he was thinking, and that might be a good thing to add.
Orphaned.
Yeah, it kind of did. Okay. If nobody has any questions about that, I think what our intent is to try to have a public hearing on the comp plan amendments at the next planning commission meeting, unless something else changes, but that's the proposal. So we'll be doing SEPA, getting the notice of hearing out, and then we'll let you know in advance. The meeting will then be over at the other building if there is a public hearing. So you'll be seeing that next month. And then, do you want to go ahead and talk about your items?
Are you through
You're
all of
first.
your
Yep.
stuff?
No, but you're first.
Yeah, but you're through A.
Through the comp plan.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I've got several items here. It's kind of the first of my list of
things that I want to attack in our codes. One of the first things I did when I started here in 2015 was went through the entire Port Orchard Municipal Code and looked at all the enforcement provisions and found out that our municipal code was an absolute mess. It just, you could see where things had evolved over the years, and so things got added and changed, and there was never any comprehensive cleanup. And so there's enforcement provisions that refer to types of enforcement that we don't even have here anymore. There's some bits and pieces that don't comply with state law. They don't make sense. So I'm starting to attack some of those things and starting to also go after some of the things that I need in order to be able to do the enforcement that I'm called upon to do. So this first one may not be a necessary thing. Residential yard, garage, estate sales, those kind of things, they're not a big problem here in Port Orchard. In the 4 years I've been here, I'm only aware of one place that has been generating complaints. And it has been generating complaints the last couple of years, and there's some history from prior years that I've discovered as well. So I was asked to put together some ideas of what regulation of yard sales could look like here if that's the direction that we want to go.
What kind of complaints were they?
Just a place that's essentially running an ongoing business out of a residence by way of having yard sale every weekend, week after week after week for a couple of years.
So the complaints about noise or traffic, or just the fact that they're doing it? Traffic,
impact on the neighborhood, and also when someone's doing that, they're not paying business taxes. They're not reporting the income. Yeah, it's when you've got canopies and sheds and stuff on the property that are all devoted to doing this activity over a period of years.
Unsightly.
Yeah. So
I was just wondering what the actual complaints were that were coming in. Are they because of the noise, because of the traffic, because of the unsightliness?
More because of the traffic, and
I don't think they're complaining about the lack of income to the city.
No, although
it's a factor to consider, but I don't think that's what the complaints are.
I don't necessarily know the motivation behind the complaints. But that is something I do get, because if I'm doing enforcement on these businesses over here, they tend to get a little testy when they see other people doing things and say, well, wait a second here, you're on me over here, what about? And so enforcement tends to generate complaints, similar complaints. So what I did was I surveyed my colleagues in the Washington Association of Code Enforcement and said, okay, what do you do? I know what we did in Lakewood. That's where most of my career is from. We had problems with yard sales in Lakewood, so you had to get permits. It was no cost, but you had to get a permit. That was so we could track them, because we had perpetual yard sales in multiple places, and we'd have one over here, and they would put signs out for miles around throughout, just blanketing the entire city and things like that. So that was a place with real problems. So I got feedback. Some jurisdictions do permits. That's on the really low end. There are only a handful that do.
Yeah, that's
typically they limit the number. 4 a year is pretty much the top end. Some limit it to 2 a year, and maybe they have one community-wide day, and so maybe it's your 2 a year plus the one community-wide day. Limitation of hours of operations. Typically limit them to 3 or 4 days per event. Goods have to be household goods belonging to the residents rather than things that are purchased for resale. Virtually unenforceable, but I know that in my home neighborhood there's a yard sale. They do yard sales multiple times throughout every summer, and there's always about 2 tables full of what are clearly packaged I think maybe it's dolls or something like that, and it looks like home packaged. So they're running a home business out of that place.
Well, and the one you're talking about, it's not goods from their home.
No, it's not.
It was, I was told it was basically leftover goods from both a hobby and a closed business, but what seems to be happening is there seems to be no end to the supply. So that would tend to suggest that there's...
That's kind of by Cedar Cove.
Yeah.
I went to it once and I bought a really cool old camera.
Yeah.
But I see their
Some
signs out
neat
all
stuff.
the time saying,
Yeah.
Oh, the ones
come
that are
buy our
all-
junk.
World's best garage
Come buy our
sale.
junk.
whatever
Garage
it's
called.
sale.
I've been
But it's literally been
Yeah.
going on for years.
Yeah.
I always think they're moving.
Yeah.
I do.
People.
Yeah.
Going out of
It
business
looks like
sale.
a moving city.
So-
There's always.
Every now and then.
Yeah.
So these
Dad's
are
garage
so on
sale.
this on the second page are kind of the ideas that are from other jurisdictions. I boiled it down to a suggested some suggested provisions that make most sense to me for this jurisdiction, and that would be 4 events a year, 4 days per. One of the council members in the land use committee wanted to limit it till 6 p.m. I personally would put it 8 p.m. as a end time. I've been questioned on on the one, it shall be the responsibility of the resident and or operator to ensure traffic is not obstructed. There's one other jurisdiction that had that. I don't know if that could even be enforceable. So this is something I put out really for discussion, because I really want, I'm not saying this is the way we should go. I'm saying I was asked to put some stuff together. Here it is. What do you think? I also put together a separate piece for charitable auctions, rummage, and jumble sales. That was before I discovered that we have something in the temporary use code that applies in non-residential zones that says special events not to exceed a total of 14 consecutive days, such as amusement rides, carnivals, circuses, and parking lot sales. That's pretty much blanket. It doesn't give any, it doesn't limit hours or anything like that. But once I saw that, I have yet to see a rummage sale in a residential zone here. So I'm pretty much of the opinion that this last piece I wrote is probably not needed here. The one thing I am definite about is that the current piece in the temporary use chapter, 2058-142, should be struck. Any use not exceeding a consecutive total of 3 days for a maximum of 4 events each calendar year shall be exempt from requirements for a temporary use permit. That essentially says I could have a carnival in my front yard if I wanted to, as long as it's not more than 4 days. That is just wide open. You can do almost anything you want, anywhere you want.
Or 72 hours.
So,
I have one question. Under the residential yard garage estate sales, it talks about, it starts off with periodic non-commercial.
yes.
When you go to garage sales or estate sales where a company is hired to come in and manage it, is that considered commercial? Because they're making a profit.
Well, that's why I put down number 8, professional estate sale operators shall be properly licensed in accordance with POMC Chapter 512.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say, it allows them to do that function.
Okay.
Because you need that. That's something we need in the community.
But it's not contradictory by sticking it under the section that states non-commercial sales?
I suppose it is.
Well, everything is commercial, right? If I sell you something, that's a commercial transaction. But could we make it just maybe more clear that an estate sale doesn't trigger something like this? They're not running a business out of their house. That's what we're trying to prevent, right?
So one time.
Yeah.
What if just periodic sales or periodic sales to the public?
Or it could do periodic non-commercial and estate sales.
That would work.
I think that would be a simple solution to that. Because that's an understandable exception. Because that's where estate sales happen. You know, so yeah.
Would retail be a better word than commercial? Like non-retail?
I'm just from the enforcement standpoint, I'm a little more in favor of the non-commercial because it's a little broader.
But then what about advertising? So if you're advertising your estate sale, then does that become like a commercial sale? Or is it that you don't have a business license and you're not running a business?
Yeah, I think if we put non-commercial and estate sales, I think that works to cover it. Essentially, we're kind of creating, like Carrie said, in a sense, any sale activity you engage in is more or less commercial.
Yeah.
So we're kind of carving out an exception. It's kind of like Department of Licensing. If you sell a car, you must be a vehicle dealer under state law.
What?
But they carve out an exception and allow you to sell up to 4 cars per year individually
Okay.
as an exception to that. But if you a strict reading of the state law would say you have to be a vehicle dealer to sell a car, period. So kind of creating an exception.
So like non-licensed? Is that a way to say it? So you don't have to get a permit or a license?
Well, what do we do? Ask them to get a permit? Is it? No, that's not in there.
I would say no. My recommendation would be not to do a permit in a place where we don't have a problem.
Right.
It's a very cumbersome,
Oh my
very
God.
difficult
Stay away from
process.
Yeah.
It's hard, even if it's no cost.
But I do think they
It
should.
creates a lot of demand on staff. Yeah, and
Because right now, we're just on the corner, there's one from the weekend still
yeah,
down there.
and I had something in here about must take your signs down at the end, but that gets us into conflict with the federal
Signage.
Supreme Court ruling
And our sign
on
code.
signs.
Well, that's just, I thought that was based mostly just on verbiage. I mean, they have to remove the sign,
Yes,
so.
but
But again, that's
it
part
gets
of the sign code.
it gets into one of those court rulings was specifically related to political signs because Collier versus City of Tacoma back in the 90s, they had a provision that said you can only put your political signs up X number of days before the election, and you had to remove them within 10 days after the election. Well, how do you determine what's a political sign?
Oh,
You have to read the content.
And you can't.
You
do
have to
that.
look at the content and say that based on what it says, that's a political sign. So now, according to the courts, you violated the First Amendment.
So with
And
garage
so
signs,
if you say
same thing.
if you say garage sale sign must be taken down by the end, well, gee, I see this sign here. It's for a garage sale that's already passed. I go do enforcement. Well, then I'm enforcing based on the content of the sign.
That is such a glitch, though.
It's a horrendous. court
So we
ruling.
just are going to have crappy signs everywhere now?
No, we just do what we always do, and I go around and pull them down. Because you can't put any signs on utility pole.
I
Period.
know, this one's just on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Like on a cardboard
Well,
box.
then,
They taped it to
yeah,
it.
then
It's right
it's
on the corner down.
yeah, then it's once they fall into disrepair. The exact same thing. Political signs, we can't make them come. I can't go and round them up anymore after the election.
Okay.
Used to be, I'd wait 10 days. After 10 days after the election, I would go around citywide and round
So
them
what
all up.
happens to 'em
I
now?
can't do that anymore. They sit until they become dilapidated, and then it doesn't have to do with the content. It has to do with the condition of the sign.
Gosh, but when I put a sandwich board on the corner, they came and got that so quick.
Yeah, because it was based on the type of sign, not on the content.
Oh, it wasn't on my property, it was on
Yeah.
my neighbor's.
But
still.
it's an absolutely horrendous court ruling, and it's got nationwide implications. And now they're even starting to take and apply it to regulations that have nothing to do with signs.
Oh my goodness.
It's, yeah, anyway.
Okay.
So my question having to do with
Sidetrack.
this
Sorry.
is that it has, like, we wrote this code because of one garage sale that's perpetual.
Right.
And how are we going to communicate to them? Hey, you've had more than 4 garage sales, so now you can't do it anymore. Like, and what
Well-
happens if they go ahead and do it anyway? Or isn't there a way that we
'Cause you're
can
not
say,
here
hey,
on
if you're going to do it more than
Saturdays.
4 times, then why don't you you need to get a business license?
Yeah, but and we
And-
don't want to do that because by saying, well, you're by making it a licensing violation, then by extension you're essentially saying, well, there must be a way that they could get a license to do that, which they can't.
Right.
Unless they like rented a
So-
building and turned it into an actual business. Like the
Well, and then
rest
it
of
would
Yeah,
have
we've
to
got
be it would have to be
buildings,
zoned.
so why
The
not?
zoning would have to allow it and all of that.
Right.
So you want to be, for enforcement purposes, you want to stay away from things like this being as a licensing violation, because it's really not. It's a use violation. It's not a compatible use to a residential
Right.
zone.
But is this going to be communicated to them before, like, once the code
Yeah.
has been put into place, so they know, like, hey, if you
Yeah.
have 4 more, then you're done for the year.
And
Otherwise,
that's-
we're going to come and shut
Yeah.
you down.
And that's
Are you
the
gonna
way
work on
I've
the
always.
weekends to shut them down.
That's the way
that's
I've always enforced this kind of thing is once I get a complaint, the complaint might say, well, they've done this 10 times already this year. Well, now I know about it. Now I start counting. I give them notice and they get their 4. And after the 4, they're done. And then if they continue, then we go to the enforcement for, to the violation, the penalties.
Right. And what are the penalties and what type of enforcement is there?
Well,
Yeah, that's a good
that's the fourth or third item I have for tonight.
Before you get there,
But
Sorry.
like go back to you were talking about the periodic non-commercial
yeah,
phrasing. You've already said that it's residential yard, garage, and estate sales. So you've already covered that the estate sales are under this
Right.
provision. Oh, instead of, again, reiterating estate sale, under 8 where you say professional estate sale operators, properly licensed, essentially their commercial is the agreement with the person the people who are having the estate sale, not the people who are coming to buy the supplies. So
Yeah,
I don't
it-
see where it would actually fall under here as a commercial, or it would
Yeah.
fall as a non-commercial to the people buying the products.
it sort of depends on how they run them. If it's if the estate sale, if they come in as just as operators, then sure they're not making it commercial. What they often do though is the estate sale company comes and they essentially buy all the contents of the house, and then they run the sale from the house. And so that really is a commercial activity, but it's kind of it's a compatible. It's compatible with a residential.
You're not
zone.
going to do 4 of those a year.
Yeah. So they would do 4 at one. They could do 4 times at one location then.
It's a lot of people dying.
That's not typically what the professionals do. They'll go buy those estates from the homes that they're in and then move around. So I couldn't see that being a real issue.
Yeah, they'll buy the contents. They'll run the sale for maybe 2 weekends,
Right.
and then whatever's left, they'll take away to their thrift store, or they'll wholesale off or something like that.
And they move on.
And then they move on to the next one. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Aside from just those little things we talked about, what's your feedback as far as like the hours? I mean, number one, should we do this? Number 2, should we do the rummage sale thing or drop that? And then, I mean, does this seem?
I think it needs to be done.
Are these provisions generally acceptable, or?
I think I would prefer to change it to 6 p.m. rather than 8 p.m.
You'd go for 6. Okay.
I put dusk in my notes, but I was thinking of just summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, because 8 p.m. in the summertime, I mean, it's
Yeah.
still late.
3:30 in the wintertime.
Yeah.
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 Because especially if it's
8 o'clock at night I don't want other people driving right outside my house. And
okay.
And generally they end. Way
And most
earlier than
most
that.
don't
Yeah.
most don't go beyond 6 unless it's like one
If
of
they
the
are at
community.
Right.
You know, if it's a community event, they'll tend to. But
I like the 8 a.m. though, because they do tend to start super early too.
yeah,
Agreed.
so stick with 6 p.m. ending time then. Rather than 8 p.m.
I do love number 4, where it says all goods, tables, canopies, associated paraphernalia shall be removed from public view between sale events.
Oh, 6, yeah.
I think that's huge.
Right, but that's chair. Oh,
That's,
okay, that's
yeah,
also in the
6.
other one. It's just number 6. Okay.
Oh, sorry, but yeah, I really do like that because I think that's
Well, yeah, 'cause they just throw tarps over it.
exactly that's horrible. That's horrible. So
Okay.
Maybe you should include tarps in that. Goods, tables, canopies, tarps.
Yeah, we can do that.
that's a good one. Good call.
You don't like the blue tarps?
Yeah.
Thrown over, thrown over the tables.
brown.
You can't see my table.
Or
My
the
table's not in
camouflage, they
public
pretty
view.
much disappear.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so that's number 1.
I take it we're in agreement that that's something that we should move forward with.
Sounds like, yeah. The next is, I think it's the next is residential vehicle service and repair. And this is something I initially wrote years ago, and then brought it here, revised it a little bit, and brought it here when we had a very big particular problem here in Port Orchard. And it helped me deal with that problem finally after several years of us fighting it. But I've never been happy with it, with the way it was written. Some things I just was never comfortable with the way I had written it. And now that we have another place I need to apply it, I'm able to see some of the holes. And also, the original version was written in the context of a zoning code that included a lot of definitions that we don't have in our zoning code. So there's a big need for definitions associated with this, as well as there was a provision in here that said that vehicles must, it was limited to vehicles that belong to residents or members of the resident's family, etc. And based on court rulings relating to what constitutes a family, there's no way that would survive in court. So that needed to go. So what I'm proposing here is a fairly major rewrite of this section now to include definitions of driveway, better definitions of what constitutes major and minor service and repair.
But this is just for non-commercial, right?
Yes, this is for in residential zones, and does it exempt?
So Mike,
It exempts in any non-residential zone unless an integral part of a legal use in the zone or on any property in a resident.
so can I ask you a question for like downtown? In my little hood, we have residential, and then we're right next to commercial, like
Right.
my building, and then there's like Holland Sons, which is a mechanical.
Oh, they're the
repair
ones
place.
down on,
Yeah, and there's always been this like battle with, unspoken battle with the hood because it's really hard to see to get out onto Calb. It's crazy. And now they can't park in one spot in front of their shop, but they
Right.
just are moving down further.
And putting a snarky sign.
But he's still
great. They're not parking on the sidewalk.
He's still parking
Yeah.
his truck though on the road in 4-hour parking, his tow truck.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering because it's right next, but because it butts right up, it's a different set of rules, right, for him?
Well, yeah, if his
Because
is,
residential's across the street.
yeah, and even if he were in a residential zone, there's one at the corner of Sydney and Lippert. That's a residential zone, but it's a legal non-conforming use. So this would exclude, this would not apply to them because they're a legal use. So this is only for
in regular neighborhoods.
Yeah, and this is not residential zone. This is accessory to residential uses. So this stays away from, because you may have entire residential neighborhoods that are leftovers in what's now a commercial zone. You still want to preserve the residential character
Sure.
of that neighborhood until it transitions.
Thank you.
So, so this is written to apply to residential uses, not by zone.
So if the business was being used as like a restaurant, then would this apply to them as well? If there's a non-conforming use other than an auto shop, but they're doing auto.
This would not apply to them, but the rest of the zoning code would, because if they're a restaurant, then unless they were in a commercial zone that allowed automotive uses, they couldn't do an automotive use there.
Okay.
So this is strictly to allow or to define what you can and can't do at a residence as in the way of vehicle service and repair.
So you can't fix your friend's car.
Well, you can't do like the guy down on Bay Street down at Mitchell Point, who was buying vehicles at auction, 2 or 3 vehicles at a time, bringing them there to his home, parting them out, taking parts off, rebuilding, doing body work, running engines, having buddies come over with their vehicles, and working till all hours of the night, weekends,
Yeah.
etc.
That's a lot.
Day after day after day, all day, every day.
The burnout mode.
Well, yeah, that was because he was working on a car in the right of way, working on the fuel pump, and he had an extra battery sitting there, and he caught the car on fire while he was under it working on it.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
jeez.
And so it burned up the car and his fence and part of his boat. So that was the place that I took care of
Yeah.
with the first draft of this.
Wow.
Now what I need to deal with is Crawford Road, which is an entire road where this is from one end to the other. And it's a private road, and this only addressed activity on public roads.
Oh,
I left out, so that's where this needs definitions to include easements, and shared easements and private roads. So that's what I'm looking to do here, is to clean that up, to get rid of the unconstitutional bits, to create definitions, to extend it to private roads, ingress and egress easements, to clean up some of the flow of it.
gosh, I could use this for my Uber. I don't think you're alone.
And to also address the,
Working on cars at his house.
yeah. And then this also would extend it to include the nuisance activities of revving the engines, producing smoke, all of that, and then some stiffening up the provisions regarding spilling fluids, and no testing of alarm and sound systems at your residence, So, any comments, problems, concerns with that?
I don't have anything. Looks good.
Okay.
It was something I didn't really know anything about.
I think, so what if you don't have a garage and you want to work on your car?
It says driveway.
No? It says
Well,
has to
it
be-
limits you to minor work in the driveway. It does, that is a problem.
Yeah. I mean, it seems a little,
Constricted.
yeah, it just,
I guess the answer that I give to that is the same answer I give to the part that says that you can't do this in a multifamily property of more than 3 units. If you're in an apartment complex and you need to go out and change your tire or change the oil or something like that, and there's not a problem, I'm not going to hear about it and I'm not going to care about it.
mm-hmm.
But if
You start it.
But if it's
You
an
wait 5 weeks to
ongoing
finish it.
problem and it's generating complaints, that's when I'm going to get involved. And that's kind of the answer to the I don't have a garage thing is, if you need to go out and do some work on your engine and you don't have a garage, if you're not doing it all the time, nobody's going to call me.
It's true.
Nobody's going to make an issue of it. It's only going to be the people that are creating a real nuisance that are even going to, come to attention.
It's not like you're out there driving around looking for them.
No, not at all.
So if this, so how would it? So how would it come to your attention? Only from complaints from other from neighbors, or
Usually, or like Crawford Road, where I and the police and fire can't even drive down the road because you can't. There isn't even 12 feet of clear width through the vehicles on both sides of the road that are being worked on and parted out and all of that down the entire length of the road.
It almost got fixed with the tornado.
Just missed. Doggone it. By about 100 yards.
It wasn't much. It was the intended target.
Yeah, that is one of those.
This does keep you from working on your vehicle like out in the street, like in a street parking space,
Yeah.
or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
'Cause that's not the intended use of
Right.
the public roads. Okay.
Right.
Well, it's still based on complaints too, so. if you don't have
Yeah.
a complaint,
Right.
But that is a big problem with this, but it's how do you regulate it without running into that problem?
I don't know, but I mean, I don't really like the way that sort of targets people that don't have the type of house that would necessarily have a garage. You know what I mean? It's like a little bit.
Or people who don't have a driveway. It's
Right.
because that is something
Yeah.
that I do wrestle with that stuff, when in writing this kind of thing.
Yeah. Is there any way to?
Because one of my neighbors,
So-
they don't have a garage, and if they decided to take their entire car apart in their driveway, I wouldn't care.
And it's like
Quiet.
minor work shall only be performed in a fully enclosed building, so you can't even change your oil unless you have
No,
a garage.
that should say major work, doesn't it?
It says
It
minor.
does, but an open accessory structure on a parking pad or in the driveway. You have several choices.
Oh, okay. Which
Directly adjacent to the house, garage, or carport. So you would have to
which line are you looking at?
be on 6.
6. Minor work shall only be performed in a fully enclosed building, an open accessory structure on a parking pad or in the driveway directly adjacent to the house, garage, or carport. And, maybe the directly adjacent is not necessary there. I'm not really sure what that means in the first place.
Is that thing in the driveway?
Yeah, that could just end at driveway.
That would be a little better. You don't obviously want your neighbors doing it in their front yard, right? But
Well,
at the same time,
yeah, that's another one I kind of wrestle with is that the driveway or parking pad shall mean established driving and parking areas located on a property not within the public right-of-way, private road, etc., the surface of which shall be maintained in such a condition as to, I'm going to change the way that's worded, to in such a way as to be impervious to the infiltration of water and other fluids. On the one hand, that, if you're doing it on concrete and you spill oil, you can clean it up. On the other hand,
Yeah.
if you do it in your lawn, it can be
Yeah.
filtered out by the soil rather than running off the driveway into the stormwater.
Well, I'm just gonna,
So it's almost better to do it in the lawn.
just an added layer. My driveway they're actually grass pavers, so it looks like lawn.
Yeah,
We do change the oil on it because it's a driveway.
right?
Yeah. So I might drop that impervious surface part. I'm not sure yet.
Where is that? I'm sorry.
In the definitions,
Oh.
the very first definition
Okay.
for driveway and parking pad.
And to be fair, it is America, and most people do not have an empty garage where they can put their car
Yeah.
in.
No, they're all.
I sure don't.
They're all
Yeah.
I can tell you if I needed to do
Mine
major body
doesn't.
work to our vehicle,
Yeah.
I'd be doing it in my driveway because there's no way I'm getting my car in my garage.
And so would I.
Me either.
And so would I. And I grew up doing that too. You know, we worked on our own cars
Yeah.
when I was growing up, but there was never a complaint because, you know, we went out, we did the work, we got it done, and then maybe a year later we might need to do some more work.
Yeah.
But we weren't doing it all the time.
Right.
And,
On other people's
and
cars.
we weren't
Yeah.
doing it at 10 o'clock at night.
You're
and-
being respectful.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what it
exactly.
Right, but so then if we're doing that according to the code, we're actually still breaking the code. So is there a way instead that we could do something like the garage sale and put a time limit on it? Like, certain number of times a year, you can do it in the driveway, limited duration, rather than like, because now I'm on the planning commission, I see that code, if I start doing major work to my car in my driveway, I'm gonna be like, I'm breaking the law.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one because that's a good thought, but then, you know, then that takes me right back to this guy who's been a real problem. I can't be tracking how many times he's doing it and how often
That's true.
and all of that.
And some of it's perpetual though. There's
Yeah.
perpetual work right across from my restaurant.
right,
There's 9 cars there that are being worked on. Oh, one of them at least every single day.
yeah,
But that, I mean, doesn't this kind of address it in 4? No more than one vehicle may be undergoing any
At a
stage
time.
of service or repair at any one time.
So
It helps.
the one that's up on stilts.
Yeah.
So I would
That
just
one.
call
Yeah.
you and say they've got one on stilts. It's been on stilts for a month.
But they're not working on it. at the
No,
moment.
it's
They're
just
working on
on
the one next
stilts.
door to it.
Now that is
It just sits there.
That's
It's a
something that
carcass.
we don't
It's a car
have
carcass.
here, and we did actually
It's a car carcass.
have that in Lakewood that you couldn't have a vehicle up on
Carcasses.
blocks or jack stands for more than 30 days.
So maybe we should add
Now, there again, you get into, there are people who have collector cars who keep those cars up off the ground.
They're usually in
But not
something.
outside.
Not
Usually,
outside in the
but,
weather.
well, not in
Agreed.
Lakewood.
Well, I mean, the collectors in this part of the hood, they have
In
garages.
Lakewood, that
That's
that-
just regular.
$30,000 collector car is under a blue tarp up on jack stands in the driveway. Because their garage is full of stuff.
You need to have more garage sales, not fewer.
10 times a year.
Required minimum.
Just, yeah, just.
It's kind of never ending.
But that is a good thought that, you know, we probably should have something about how long you can have something sitting up on blocks.
I like
'Cause
the term
it's a
car
safety.
carcass too. If
it's
you want
a
to use that,
safety
go ahead.
Well, now the other thing
But
is,
then it'd have to be defined.
in a sense, that's already addressed.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, because what I didn't bring here, because it's not in the zoning code, is I just got a change passed the council for nuisance vehicles. And nuisance vehicles are any vehicles that are, here we go. You cannot have junk, wrecked, dismantled, partially dismantled, or apparently inoperable vehicles. And an apparently inoperable vehicle is got flat tires, partially covered with moss, leaves, needles, or vegetation, has grass growing up around it, or other conditions exist that support
Like
a
no
reasonable
tires.
belief that the vehicle has not moved or been maintained for 30 days or more. So if it's been on blocks for 6 weeks, it's apparently inoperable. And
Yeah.
it's a violation of the nuisance code.
Excellent.
So this just went, in fact, if you would like. Oh, no, sorry. That's another copy of this one. But it's,
Can I make copies? Should we just throw it on copier?
only if anyone wants it, but,
I wouldn't mind having that actually. I would love to know what the nuisance code is. Just because I
You're going to hand it out to your neighbors, aren't you?
Maybe call an
I'm so
87644 is,
on a mission right now. You have no idea. I'm
so,
just burning out. It's sunny out. I just don't want to see it anymore. I'm tired of it.
oh, actually, that it,
I
That is an extra copy.
Thank you.
Oh, here's the rest of it.
I'd like to get that one.
It's on this 20.66010 that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Or 20. What about the ownership of the car, or who the car is registered? Would that help you? Because
That's
you could say if they could do it in there without a garage or anything, if they're the registered owner of the car that's working on it, or they are the registered owner of the car is
It's
there
there.
with
Well,
the
that's-
repair.
Yeah.
yeah. That's number one. Limited to yada yada yada. That is currently registered to an occupant of the premises.
Yeah.
A resident of the premises. So I took out the whole thing about or family members and just plain it's got to be registered to someone who lives there.
So if this includes just one vehicle that's registered to somebody who lives there, they can only work on it on certain days, at certain times, so they're not working on it at all hours of the night. I mean,
Do we need the
do we
rest?
really care if major work is conducted outside? I mean, is that like,
But you still have the guy who he has 15 cars and okay, he only works on one at a time, but today he's working on one and tomorrow he's working on another and he's going to be working on doing major work on cars 365 days a year, just only one vehicle at a time.
I think too, this isn't aimed just like if your husband's gonna go pull the car out and work on it. I don't
Yeah.
think it's aimed at
right,
that.
I don't either, but I think that may be the way that some residents
interpret it.
it.
Yeah, true. That's
It's
true.
yeah, you're right. The technical reading of it,
Yeah.
you know, I would have to violate this to work on my cars if I lived in Port Orchard.
I don't work on my cars.
You know, but
I'm not that
Someday
good.
you might want to.
I don't want to.
Why would, I mean,
I would really.
rebuilding transmissions and engines and welding, that's
but
major work.
Yeah, you don't want that
No, you
outside.
don't. No,
generally.
that's what I'm saying. I don't think you
Pretty
want
much
people doing that in
regardless.
the neighborhood.
So, you know, those people who, you know, you may have to find someone who has a garage
Yeah.
or something like that.
But you couldn't use it because you wouldn't be a resident of that.
Well, but it's only if it's outside that applies. If it's inside a building, it doesn't. Actually,
It does.
Oh, it does.
Here. Yeah.
I'll put some more thought into it. I'll put some more thought into it and see if I can come up with some workarounds. But aside from that, is this something that the commission would support for
Yeah, the concept, I think.
Yeah.
recommend the council adopt?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Are you okay with it with the changes that he's talking about now, or do you want to see it come back in a revised form before you?
I'd want to see it come back.
Revised form.
Okay.
I can see the more final version.
Okay. I'll have to put some work into it and get it back ASAP.
Now to back up, if we may,
Yeah.
the garage sales, does the planning commission feel comfortable with the way it is written to move forward, or would you prefer if this is well to see the final edited version before making a recommendation to council?
This one you had not asked for a motion and vote on.
I'm sorry?
I was talking to Doug. This one for the garage sales. That was when you had not asked for a
True.
motion and vote on a recommendation.
Yeah, I
But
was just asking for,
but
do we
you-
even want to do this? And yeah, I guess I wasn't really thinking about your process here.
Okay. So you don't need a
Well,
recommendation from us or anything this evening, you just wanted an idea of,
unless
are we in
the
support?
commission is in favor of that with the changes we talked about, making it 6 p.m., adding tarps, dropping the rummage sale thing.
Do we want to drop the road sale?
Yeah, I didn't really get a solid feel of
Got
that.
That's covered in another part of the code.
No, it's covered in all but residential zones in another part of the code. And my thought is, if you want to have some limitations for it in the residential zones, we could go with this. But I've yet to see one, to even be aware of one happening in a residential zone. So I'm just not sure if there's any need for it here.
It also keeps us from being reactionary.
It does.
I think churches have them frequently.
Yeah.
And they're in residential areas
Well,
sometimes, so.
Then let's take a quick look at that and see
Not
if.
anymore. All the churches have been or are about to be rezoned to civic and institutional.
Oh,
So strictly
right.
speaking,
Just in their,
they would
just
yeah,
their
they have it on their
lots.
own property.
Oh,
right.
okay.
And schools are also institutional, so schools are automatically a non-issue. So, yeah, I think we're pretty much already covered by what's in the temporary use code then.
So scratch this, 0.670? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's my thought, is, now that I see it's pretty much covered almost everywhere by the temporary use code.
So Carrie.
Now, if we wanted standards for what it should look like in a temporary use, in the other zones, but the problem there is then you'd be singling them out while allowing community, sales events and stuff like that to not have any standards attached to them. So you'd be singling out nonprofits for special treatment in a sense. That's why I didn't go there, because I started going that way and then thought, well, with the way that's written, that would be a problem.
I don't think there's any harm in keeping it there.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Okay.
Right, we want
Make
to
it-
write, sorry.
I was gonna say I just make it uniform and to the other area, other sections, but what were you gonna say?
I was just going to say, if you look at limited hours, it says limited hours question, so we'd want to have it probably match the residential yard sales.
Like to see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could like switch and say you were doing it for a nonprofit, right? And then
Right.
you could go all the time. Is
Right,
that
or
right?
a church
Like,
could be like, hey, I'm going to have a yard sale at your house.
yeah. Right. I mean,
Well,
that
but
could-
this
I don't think so.
shall be conducted on the premises of a charitable nonprofit organization or non-commercial educational institution, or you'd have to get a temporary use permit. So this wouldn't allow it to happen at a home.
Okay.
I'm looking at the wrong spot. 'cause
If
it
you
says
have this-
in residential zones, and it just says for the benefit
Right.
of these organizations.
But look at 5. Look down at 5 under that
Oh, sorry.
section.
Should have kept reading.
So if it is
Yeah, you add
somebody
terms.
doing it in their private home, they need to get a permit
Well,
on
yeah,
their own
they.
private properties. Is that-
Yeah. If they wanted to, they'd have to apply for a permit, and probably wouldn't get it to do it at a Well, at a residence, you would just do it as a yard sale. Because with the yard sale, it doesn't. We don't get into who's the beneficiary of the
Yeah.
sale.
But if you had somebody that was having like 7 sales or like a sale every weekend,
Right.
and then they were saying they were doing it for a charity, then the same code would apply to them. Like they couldn't do that, right? That would start the count
Yeah.
for 4.
Yeah. It would still be limited to 4.
Okay. It doesn't matter who you're doing it for.
Right. Yeah, because that's per location. So.
So does this even apply though, since it's just? So what kind of charitable organization is not a church or a school? So like the Eagles or not like the
bank.
Eagles Hall or the
Or KHS.
yeah or the what is that building that's up there across from the Gibbon Center? I've seen them in that parking lot before.
But Ford
Elks.
or Elks.
Elks.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
They've
Yeah,
had
so there
numbers.
are
Yeah.
some of these still in residential zones. So yeah. So if you're
It-
okay with,
It might
if
be
you want to
keep it in.
keep that in there, then okay.
Anybody opposed to that?
Nothing with it. Get some water.
They make the hours the same as a garage sale.
All right.
That's the hours.
Oops.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I just slipped.
Or use our kitchen,
Okay.
all the way in the back.
Okay.
Yeah, because then if they wanted to be able to do different hours, they could apply for a temporary use permit, and so because there's a mechanism for seeking approval to do something differently.
And we're adding tarps onto the number 4.
Yeah, tarps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeterminate color.
Doesn't matter.
I'll wait until Savannah gets back, but would you like planning commission to make a recommendation?
Yeah, if you're ready to do so, definitely, yeah.
As
'Cause-
edited, how do you guys think?
Yard sale season is starting.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Where's the kitchen?
Just gives a thumbs up and then move on.
Sorry, I'm going in offices. I'm an idiot.
It's hidden away.
Follow your nose.
At our old building, people, it went around in a circle, but people literally would wander into a certain area and they'd be like, how do I get out of here? It's just a circle. Go ahead.
Just keep going.
Just keep walking. I promise you will find your way
Eventually
out.
you'll find your way
You
out.
do eventually.
It's like one of our neighborhoods in Lakewood. You just say, follow a yellow, get onto a street that has a yellow center line and just keep going. You'll eventually get out. It's the Oak Brook neighborhood. It's in the middle of a golf course.
Yeah,
And,
it's hard to find your
oh
way out.
my goodness,
Yeah.
it's a maze.
Sorry.
After 18 years working there, I still couldn't find my way around Oak Brook.
So
Hey, could I get a motion?
I
This is on the
move that
residential
the-
garage. This is on the residential garage one.
Garage sale.
Yeah.
I move that the planning commission recommend that the city council adopt the residential yard, garage, and estate sales addition to the code with the additions that we spoke about, or the edits that we
The
spoke
amendments.
about.
Okay.
Amendments, yes, those ones. Smart.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
So then the vehicle one needs to come back after some more work.
Terry, when you write my motion, make me sound smart, okay?
You sounded smart.
So there's one other that didn't make it on the agenda.
I brought it in. I just passed it out.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we had one.
Yeah.
Is it different?
The one for Title 20.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
it just wasn't on the original agenda.
Yeah, and it didn't. We had a copier breakdown in the middle, and I thought, oh my gosh, maybe they didn't get it, so I just redistributed it.
Oh, I see.
Oh, okay.
Same
I'm
black,
like,
white, and a
is it
color
any
version.
different?
No, it's
Okay.
not a bit.
Okay.
Okay, good. Glad you all got it.
Terry, if I may jump in, I am unable to stay for the full time tonight.
Okay.
Is there something, a topic on here that you really want recommendation on tonight that I can stick around for to call for the vote, or?
No, the only thing that I wanted to kind of confirm with everyone was that the last item, the potential rezones that are all mostly either they weren't done correctly when we updated the zoning map in March, or people have called and said, I don't like my zoning, will you please change it? That we wanted to take those to council as soon as possible. So if you look at those yourself, and if you have any objections or concerns, you can just let me know privately, because we're not asking for a vote at this
Okay.
point. We're going to be having a hearing on these.
Okay.
So that's the only one. If you have some concerns, just pass them along.
Okay,
Thank you.
you bet.
And we'll still have a quorum, so that's okay. Who wants to be in charge after Stephanie leaves?
If we go by seniority, okay.
Thank
I did
you.
a great job that one time.
All you have to do is go, meeting adjourned.
I can do that.
Okay, so I'm sorry,
Okay,
it's back to you.
so this last one is kind of a cleanup thing. It's what I talked about at the very outset of all the enforcement provisions that are just different here, there, and everywhere, and they're in different places. A lot of the development code all points to 20.02, but then some parts of the zoning code or the development code don't, and they retain their own enforcement provisions that might or might not be consistent. So this is just going through all of the development code and trying to make it all consistent, trying to point it all to one place unless there are very specific enforcement provisions that are needed, that need to remain in one place. And so what I'm looking to do here, and there's just a couple of little minor word edits here and there to other things. Violation of this title for anyone to use, construct, locate, alter, demolish, or cause to be used, etc. So I added altered in to that one. Violation of this title to remove, deface, or fail to comply with any sign, notice, complaint, or order. In this first one, 060, F is redundant. It's already stated up in B. So I propose to strike F and then just simply any violation, add that any violation here is also would constitute a public nuisance. Because once something's declared a public nuisance, then it brings in the possibility, the power of the city to abate that public nuisance. So then going down to enforcement, that doesn't need to change. But penalties, one of the things I'm trying to do, again, trying to make everything consistent, and we can legally have options for enforcement penalties. So a particular violation, if the city chooses to make it this way, can be an infraction or a criminal violation or a nuisance or all of the above. And that's not a legal conflict because those are different categories. And some jurisdictions, they'll say, well, the first offense is an infraction, and then the second offense within a year or 5 years is a misdemeanor. But that means then that the guy who absolutely, knowingly, and willfully goes and just rapes the environment, well, the first time it's just an infraction because that's what we put in the code. And then the person who really innocently violates a second time, well, sorry, it's a crime. Whereas putting this in this way gives me the discretion because criminal prosecution is not done lightly. It's very hard to do. You have a very high bar of proof, and it takes months to prosecute a criminal charge. So it's something that's only done when it's absolutely appropriate, and when you are sure you can convince a jury that they need to convict somebody. But without a criminal charge in there, we have some things that say, well, for inspection procedures, if I'm denied entry, I can go and get a warrant. No, I can't. If there's not a criminal violation, I can't get a warrant. In Washington State, there is no such thing as administrative warrants. There is in other states, but not in Washington State. The courts cannot issue warrants for civil violations, only for criminal violations. So if I have a situation where I need to get a warrant, I have to have the option of, I have to have a criminal charge to back that warrant, or else I can't get it. That's just a quirk in Washington State, and that's the way we do it here. So, so I'm making this consistent. We've already done it with the fire code. We've already done it with the nuisance code, and with other codes where we've added in the criminal as one of the optional penalties. And then just the catch-all, in addition or alternative to, we can use any other legal remedy that's available to us, which might be an injunction, a court order, whatever other legal remedies. It doesn't put us in a box. So then mobile homes, it would be the same thing, taking out the separate stuff and just referring it all back to 2002. Similarly on subdivisions, taking out all the extra, pointing it to 2002, except for these 4 provisions that are specific to the subdivision code, and they're based on state law. So it would leave those in and then say all other violations go to 2002. And again, the same with land disturbing activity and stormwater drainage. So it's just kind of a cleanup of Title 20 to make it all consistent and put it all in one place.
This is the one we read. Explain to me violation A, that paragraph.
Which one?
Which first paragraph?
The first
9.02.060 violations, paragraph A.
violation is title for any person to initiate or maintain or cause to be initiated or maintained the use of any structure, land, or property within City of Port Orchard without first obtaining the permits or authorizations required for use by this title. It's really almost redundant again with B.
It says, but even maintain. So if I have a broken outlet, I have to get a permit.
No.
Broken outlet.
No, it's for anyone to initiate or maintain or cause to be initiated or maintained. In this case, maintain means continued.
Continue.
And it's the use
Yeah.
of the property.
So it's
Not as in maintaining the property.
right.
maintaining
No,
the
it's
structure.
to. You could say you could reread it as any person to initiate or continue or cause to be initiated or continued the use of any structure, land, or whatever without first obtaining whatever permits might be required for that.
I was thinking as maintain. I mean,
Yeah.
people are going to paint their houses, are going to do those things and
Yeah.
maintain their property.
That
That's something
is
you want them to do.
right. That is confusing. I ran into that in court one time with a different code. We could easily change maintain to continue.
I think
if
it would
that
be
would
more
make it
clear, and
clear.
it's
Yeah.
likely that somebody's going to say, well, you have a permit to do some minor maintenance, of your house. Your property.
Yeah.
You want people maintaining their properties.
Yeah, we had that with signs. You know, you're required to maintain your sign, but then maintaining an illegal sign, in that case, meaning continuing to use was a violation. It's like, huh?
Right.
You're charging me with you're an infraction for
Communication.
maintaining my sign.
Right.
So yeah, I'm fine with changing that to continue.
Carrie, I'm going to excuse myself.
Or were there any other questions? Were you guys ready for a vote on this? Do you have a moment for that?
No, you bet, you bet.
Unless there were any other questions or suggestions.
Are you all comfortable with it as, with the edits that
As
were made?
amended.
I think so.
Okay, all right. Bear with me, my apologies here. Do I have a motion?
Yes. Oh, do you need from someone else?
Carrie will do it.
Jump right in there.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council adopt the Development Code revisions for enforcement provisions and penalties as amended.
Second?
I'll second that. Or
Excellent.
whomever.
No.
So I seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
2 out of 3.
Do you, not to jump too much on the agenda, but Carrie, before I leave, do you want us to do meeting minute approvals?
If you have time.
Yeah, you bet. I have that 1 minute. All right, can I get a motion for, at first, if you all have read and agree with the February 5, 2019 meeting minutes, can I get a motion to approve them as written?
Find them. We'll file them in my.
I wasn't there, so
I move that we approve the minutes of the February 5th, 2019 meeting as written.
Second.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Anyone opposed?
I didn't vote, I abstained.
Yeah, that's, because you weren't there. That's just fine.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh wait, you weren't there? Oh,
was.
yeah, okay. Never mind.
I was in the
I was like, but you're in the minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. As the vice chair.
She was in the minutes of not being there.
She's in the minutes being gone.
You know, they have something called Skype.
And Stan wasn't here. Discussion on tree canopy.
I would have.
This is a pretty quick discussion because I actually want Nick to be able to go through this in more detail next time around. Thank you.
I'm curious as to how that
It would have been pretty entertaining.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry
Bye.
that I so
See you
early.
later.
All yours.
All right, see you next month.
Okay, see you guys next month.
Yes, we'll definitely have a meeting next month.
Okay,
as well.
sounds good.
Kind of summer break coming up here or something?
August.
I haven't even been there
It
yet.
feels like August.
It's going to be the weekend.
So next, development regulations updates.
Okay, so going through this fairly quickly because these are all things that Nick and I have been working on over the past couple of months, but as he would say, you know, these are kind of his first drafts of what he wanted to bring forward, and he hopes to bring forward some expanded regulations under these several topics for the June meeting as well. So I'll just kind of go through it very quickly. 9-lot short plats. The city of Port Orchard has always had 4-lot short plats, although under state law it's possible to increase the number of lots that are considered under a short plat to a maximum of 9. And you have to actually adopt that into your code and make regulatory provision for it if you want to do it.
I know, I checked mine. I don't
No,
know.
it's mine. I just didn't want to answer it. I'll call him back later.
This would be better gun.
I don't have a gun.
Guns don't buzz, do they?
No. My glass case is sticking out of my bag.
Oh.
No, but I looked down to look at her phone, and at first thought it was
Had a
like,
gun in my
What?
bag.
She's carrying
I know I'm a badass, you guys, but that's
Boy,
know
short
that.
plats are just boring compared to our conversation. No, it's
rechanneling.
Nick's gonna be sorry you missed
Your
this.
momentum.
Sorry, Carrie.
The city hasn't wanted to go up to 9 lots in the past because, as Doug pointed out, our code was so bad that we had a lot of issues with things like design of houses, design of lots and streets, and landscaping and other things that we hope that they're gradually coming together in our new code to be addressed. Yeah, retention of trees, things like that. So now that we're getting the big picture of regulation that's available to us under the new code, we feel more confident in saying, yes, I think it will be okay for Port Orchard to move forward with having maximum 9-lot short plats, which have less, it's a less onerous process. They don't go to the hearing examiner. There's some conditions that aren't applied to short plats per state law. There's a certain time frame that they have to be approved in per state law. They just go through an expedited process. And so we wanted to make sure that we had in place all of the things in our code that would make for good-looking short plats that are an asset to the neighborhood, that fit in, that are compatible, that aren't going to be a sore spot on the neighborhood within a few years. And so we try to incorporate some things in past short plats through the SEPA review process, but that usually only is going to work if you have critical areas on the site or it's shoreline or something else where there's a handle to get a grip on it through environmental review and not just through the development regulations. So here I think what we're saying is that we now feel that with our new standards for both commercial and residential development, we feel comfortable saying that the city should move forward to 9-lot short plats. It makes it easier on the small developers. It reduces their costs. It can bring in some additional affordable housing opportunities into the city and encourage infill development on the smaller lots that are usually what are being short platted. So for those reasons, the council has asked us to go ahead and look at putting something into code that would allow this. And so this is for your review. Take any discussions you have about it now, and then we'll discuss it again next month as well. Did anyone have any concerns about how we would implement this process, or any concerns with any issues related to this? Okay, that's good. That speaks to me then of your confidence in the code that you guys just worked on and passed. So that's a good thing. Okay, I will take this back to Nick and say that unless I hear otherwise from anybody in the next few weeks, this looks like a good basis for what he's working on, and that nobody thinks at this point anyway that the city should just be staying with 4 lots. You're okay moving up tonight if the council agrees. Okay.
Doesn't change the size requirements.
It changes nothing in the zoning code about any of the zones or the requirements for the zones or anything. It's just changing that a short plat is now considered to be 9 or fewer lots instead of 4 or fewer.
And we will be reviewing this.
It will come to you in an ordinance form, yes.
Okay.
Does this include, I'm just I didn't get a chance to read this as closely, but that on-site recreation space, so if they do build a playground, then who maintains it?
That's the next one I'm getting to.
Oh, okay.
That's separate. That's just saying that new subdivisions with 10 or more lots. So it wouldn't be short plats, but it would be all other subdivisions of
Right.
10 or more
Okay.
that they would have to provide on-site recreation space. So that's the next one on the list that we're
And
looking
handle the
at.
maintenance of that too?
Unless it's dedicated as a public park, then it would have to be under the common ownership and maintenance by the HOA.
Okay.
Does that create a concern?
So the builder maintains it, or the
HOA.
The HOA.
The
okay.
builder is going to be responsible for it until the HOA actually assumes control of the community.
Okay.
And then it would be the responsibility of the HOA.
Okay.
And what we just basically tried to do was, since we have nothing in the code right now that requires recreational space within new subdivisions, we tried to at least get a minimum in here, and we looked at other jurisdictions in the area to see how they were doing that. What the average amount was required per unit, per multifamily unit, per single family unit. And there can be a combination in here of passive recreation and active recreation improvements, and we're kind of hoping that there's a reasonable number of options in here so that it's not onerous on any one community or any one developer. But if you have any ideas for the size of the recreation space that's required, or the improvements that are required, or anything else that you think would be helpful to put into subdivision requirements for recreational amenities and open space, that's kind of what we're looking for some guidance on. If there's anything else you'd like to see in this section. And if you want to give it some additional thought over the next few weeks prior to the next meeting, you can let me or Nick know any ideas, and he can incorporate that into the next draft, which I would think is probably coming back again in June, either in ordinance form or as a second round of revisions for you. And the tree canopy requirements is the last one in here. And Doug, if you have comments about this, I'd appreciate if you jump in, because I've only been working on this from the planner point of view, not from the enforcement point of view. So, as you all know, with the new code that we adopted in March, we adopted new significant tree requirements. And I think Nick said at that time, this is just kind of a placeholder. We want to get something in here that's stronger, something that makes more sense and can actually be implemented. But we're not looking at that as the final resolution for this issue. And so what this code proposes to do is to move away from individual counting of trees and measurement of trees and preservation of this tree here and that tree here, and focus more on the big picture. Why are we trying to have tree retention? Is it to preserve just a certain tree, or is it to preserve the appearance and the function of neighborhoods in terms of green space and tree cover and the environmental benefits? And I think where Nick is going with this is more, we really want more big picture. When you look down, we want to have a certain amount of tree cover in Port Orchard, or not tree cover, but tree canopy. And it's not all about just the tree here and the tree here. It's about maintaining stands of trees in areas where it makes sense to keep them, and not requiring developers to keep this one tree here or there just because you can, but where it makes sense to have actual areas on the site that remain treed, remain forested. And there's also room in here to be able to mitigate through replanting. So it's not entirely getting rid of preserving significant trees. It's just providing some additional options to try to get the large stands of trees that are beneficial. And if you want to go through enforcement, that's
Well, yeah, so is this focused then mainly on development then, rather than on existing properties?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, this does not have anything to do with, like, if you want to cut down a tree in your yard,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
So we would be dropping the preservation then of the individual trees in existing properties?
Where you were required to preserve it before,
Yeah.
you're probably still going to be considered required to preserve it here because it was approved under those regulations. But when you come in and do a new development, for a new site, that's where we're saying we want you to look at it in terms of what percentage of the site, of the net area post-development will still have a tree canopy.
So it would keep the stuff that went into effect recently. Oh,
No,
that's the
what,
part I didn't like.
okay, but what should it be?
Well, one of the things we had talked about before was that essentially made no exceptions for like small residential lots, where you just need to get rid of this tree that's too close to the house or something like that. And then you still had to, replant 3 or 4 more trees on your property to take the place of that, or something like that, or
But it won't apply. Yeah, it won't apply just to single family residences.
Okay.
So it's new subdivisions, new short plats.
No, I'm talking about what's all
The old one.
Yeah, the old one that's currently in effect. If we're not taking that away, I think that was the one where I had given Nick some comments and said, this doesn't give any exceptions for small residences and things like that, and he didn't make any changes to that I recall.
And so we probably need to have,
That one with this one.
we probably need
look
to
at
have
them
some additional
together,
discussion
yeah.
and look at them together, because I don't think he's trying to make it harder for people. I think he's trying to make it easier
Yeah.
for people while still getting the tree
Right.
retention that we were looking for
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah, I think
it's
I'd like
just-
to see that one when I'm looking at this one at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because
I want to see how they actually kind of
Okay.
dovetail too.
I can make sure that both of those are in the same packet when we look at this again.
You know what there is?
Are you talking tree retention or tree replacement?
Both.
So for example, significant trees, now we have an option, we can cut down those 100-year-old firs and replace them with a bunch of little saplings to maintain or to prepare for that canopy 20 years from now?
It's not quite that bad. But where we have requirements in the code for landscaping and for required buffers and for tree retention, you still have to meet them. But this provides an alternative that you can look at, is preserving the canopy, the overall appearance versus each individual tree. So I think these are meant to work.
So before it was to be looked at individually, is that what I'm understanding?
There's options in here.
Each
There's
tree individual. Now they'd rather have you look at it as the end result
you had
as
to
a
go
whole.
and do a count, and then based on how many caliper inches of
So-
significant trees you had to replace like 2 for 1 or
So
something
they could
like
just
that.
plant some trees and not really care about the outcome of it eventually. Is that? I'm just wondering why
No.
is it changing?
No, we
that?
still want significant trees identified.
Okay.
And we
Yeah.
still want you
Oh,
to
I
try
see.
to maintain them where you can, but where you can't, or where it just doesn't make sense, because if you cut everything down, these are going to fall over,
Yeah.
lack of screening. Then we wanted to have some options in here for replacing those either with individuals or clusters, or if you cut this
Okay.
one down, but you're going to maintain these 10 over here,
I see.
just to but I think you're right. I think it would be better if you could look at both of these together. Yeah.
Just
okay.
to see
I
what
think
was
they're
there
going to be,
before.
they're intimately related.
Yes, they are.
So
They
you
are.
need to see the whole
Really, we
thing.
can have the whole picture.
Yeah.
All right. That works.
Do you remember what the number was for that significant tree?
Oh, I should, but I do
What
not.
if you have a
As
tiny
far
lot
as
and
what the code
the
section?
area
Yeah.
you have on your property, the roots
Where it is
like
right now.
start
Or if you
growing
can
too
send that out.
So you need to
Add
get rid of
it
it.
to the date
Any more
stuff,
trees
because I'm going
in
to
there,
keep
they're
this so I
really
can
close to your
look it over.
property.
Yeah.
and
I'll send it out to everybody
Yeah.
tomorrow.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
that's-
Because then I can.
That
look
was
at
one
it
of my
together and say,
objections to the
Like this
previous
packet.
part.
I didn't pick up from the post
took down
office
our
till this
plum
morning. I didn't get a chance to look
Yeah,
at it.
and
It was
like with
Okay.
the
So,
Okay.
yeah, and like with the
I'll do
exempted
that.
residential lots under 11,000 square feet.
That's probably
Although they tried to keep in there a provision that said that you couldn't cut down Oregon white oaks within a white oak canopy area, but it just didn't work. They still all went away. But one thing is enforcement. I didn't even know that provision was in there for years. But it became a kind of an ambiguous, a thing that was really hard to enforce, the way it was written.
3C.
So the last thing that I wanted to go through with all of you is, as I had just mentioned a little bit earlier, when we updated the zoning map in March and adopted it, we were trying to change, one of the things we were trying to do is to change all things like churches to civic and institutional to better reflect they're not really they don't count for land capacity for residential purposes, even if they're zoned that way and so forth. So I just missed a couple of them. I missed Bethany Lutheran on Tremont, and I missed the Christian Life Center in Bethel. Or not the Christian Life Center in Bethel, the Christ the Rock Church on Old Clifton. And so those are in here shown as what they should be. So they will go from, in the old code, Bethany Lutheran was R2, and it should have been changed to CI, but it wasn't. It was left as R2. And then Christ the Rock in Old Clifton should have been CI. I had left it as R3, so those will just be corrections. You'll be telling the churches, of course, but I think they already think they are CI. Then we had the pastor of the Christian Life Center come in a few weeks ago, and they have all of the properties that are kind of between Lincoln and then the commercial properties on Lund, going down Bethel and Mitchell. And so the church is developed on several properties on the north end there, and those are the ones that are shown as blue already on the map. And right now, the three that I have indicated south of that, they are also zoned CI right now. But the church thinks that they would like to go ahead and sell off those properties on the south, which are currently vacant. Wow. And you're not going to get much of a market for civic and institutional property. So they wanted to go ahead and have it done.
Yeah.
Well, one of those has a house on it already.
Yeah.
Currently.
Yeah, and I think it's not really.
No, it's vacant, but it does have a house on it.
Yeah, so they're just thinking they would like it to be CMU so they can appeal to the widest potential range of developers, commercial and or residential. And we would support that. It's similar to what is across the street and, in fact, in that whole corridor. And then, the Mitchell Avenue properties. I think Nick originally was trying to increase the density in this general area, thinking that if people wanted to do something with their property, they're smaller here, so it would be helpful to give them a more intense zoning designation, R4. But once we did that, all of the properties indicated in here are actually zoned R4 right now, so that they can have apartments and townhomes and things like that. But it doesn't allow them to do duplexes. And so, of course, as soon as this was changed, somebody came in and was like, I have this small property and I would like to do a duplex. And we're like, you can't. But it's too small to actually do an apartment building on. So, unless everybody in here came together and sold to one developer, it's actually kind of unlikely that most of these properties are going to be big enough to do anything more than a duplex or a triplex. We're not proposing to change the few in here that are already developed with apartments. That seems appropriate to their zoning, but everything in here that has the dot that is downzoned to R3, we do feel that probably that is more appropriate with such small lots, and then they could get in a little bit more intensive development and not be required to build an apartment on such a small lot.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then we had a couple of things that were misidentified. We actually had forgotten that we had Mitchell Park.
I saw that.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay. So that just needs to be rezoned to Parks and Recreation. And the city public works property down there, I did not know about it. So it was R4. And so now it will be civic and institutional. Yeah, I know.
That part, well, it's about the size of this room, and it's just a couple of benches off the side of the road, right there in between a couple of houses. It's right about. It's right about where.
Yeah, me too.
It's right up where I think if Perry went all the way through, it would intersect Mitchell.
Oh, there's like a bus stop right there too.
Yeah, there's a bus stop and there's just a little space about.
It's partially up the hill, like you could take a rest if you're tired.
Yeah.
It might even be half the size of this room.
Yeah, I don't think
It's
as
really
big as this
tiny.
room.
It's really tiny,
I know
and
what
it's
you're
just
talking about.
it's
I
there's
didn't know
just a
it was
couple
a
of
park.
benches
This is
there.
an official city park.
It is.
I didn't know.
Does the city actually maintaining it?
Probably
Yes.
thought it was somebody's yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
that's
know where
weird.
it
I've
is.
never noticed that.
Yeah, yeah. I think most people don't know it's there.
So we will have a hearing on all of these next month. I wouldn't expect anybody to say much of anything. We will be sending notice to all of these property owners, telling them what the proposal is. And we'll just see if we have any questions about that next month, but hopefully not.
Was a notice go out so that we could hear some responses, positive or negative?
We usually are just saying that the hearing is on such and such a date. They can give comments to us in advance if they want to, and they'll be in the record. So yeah, we're gonna try to get it out within the next
There
week.
would be notice of the hearing.
Yes, there will.
Okay.
So, any other discussion for the good of the order?
We're good.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
All right, nice work.
Your back door without sending an alarm off.
Can you go out the back door?
Yeah.
Sneak
Yes.
back
okay?
to your
Yep.
house out the
I know, I
back
did
door.
bring keys.
Doug, if people move a significant amount
I
of
have
dirt in
a
their
locking
yard,
gate
You're
with
gonna
a
be
code.
right there.
Right,
to get
so I just do the code.
Yeah, that's
Probably.